So tonight's panel will feature Tucker Ives, a graduate of Ithaca College in 2011 in TVR. He is currently a Connecticut Public Radio a morning news producer at WNPR. Formerly, he was a digital and talk show producer at the station and acts as a substitute host for Morning Edition and does some additional reporting. Katelyn Harrop is a talk show producer at Iowa Public Radio on programs like River to River and Talk of Iowa, and occasionally hosts. She graduated IC in 2016 after coming to New York from Oregon. Prior to that, you may have known her as the news director of Ithaca's community radio station WRFI, and she's done a variety of different freelance work, and she will soon start a new leg of her career in the Boston Globe podcast department, which is really cool. Sara McCloskey is a newscast editor and serves as the internship coordinator for Virginia Public Media. She graduated IC in 2015 and was the news director of our humble little station WICB from 2014 to 2015. And finally, the one who gave me my start here, Hannah Breisinger, graduate of IC in 2019 and former news director of WICB. She's a reporter and also serves as the host of All Things Considered for WHQR in Wilmington, North Carolina. So thank you to all of you for joining us here. And we're going to have each panelist briefly go over kind of their story of how they got to where they are now from IC and what their career is like so far. So let's start with Tucker.
Hey, so I'm Tucker. Yeah, graduated now 10 years ago. Public radio was never something I even really listened to growing up. I'm not one of those kind of backseat babies that grew up listening to All Things Considered in their parents' backseat. I was listening to, my dad would listen to the local shock jock in the afternoon and that sort of thing on the rock station. And that shock jock, since he was fired, he actually worked alongside or competed against Howard Stern back in the 80s. And he now does announcing for us on our own station. So my dad didn't think that I actually was really kind of really making it until he realized who I worked with was Bruce Barber from the WPLR down in New Haven. So I got started. Like all you guys, I did some newscast shifts for ICB. I worked on, right before we came on, I mentioned I worked on Ithaca Now. I came up with the name for Ithaca Now for your Sunday show because the name before was ICB Sundays, which was just a really terrible name for a show and very easy to approve upon. And Ithaca Now was supposed to, I came up with the name thinking it would be a placeholder name and that something better would come along. And it turns out that 12 years later, nothing apparently has. So I guess that's stuck. I started interning at Connecticut Public Radio. WNPR is the only place I've worked outside of ICB. I started off as an intern in 2009. It was a really informal internship program. I didn't do it for credit or anything. And they kept letting me come back. And it turned out that a job on our kind of flagship talk show called Where We Live had an opening for a producer pretty much as I was graduating. So as it worked out, I was able to kind of slip into that role. So I was already really familiar with it. I was producing talk shows as an intern, and then it just kind of turned into a full-time job. I did that for probably about 5-6 years. It's a really tiring, probably a pretty high burnout job. It's easy to get burned out at least. And after about 5 or 6 years, I moved on to, as Jay said, became a digital producer. I was one of, I think, 2 or 3 kind of full-time web staff, and things kind of shifted with that job after 2 or 3 years. And probably 2.5 years ago or so, I shifted back to mornings and now produce the local side of Morning Edition. So anything that you hear that's not Steven Skeep or Noel King or Rachel Martin, for the most part, is usually local hosts. And that's who I'm working with in Connecticut for the most part. So it's a job that I've been able to do mostly remote. I haven't seen my host now in a year, just like the rest of you. So we've adapted, I think, as everybody has, or has had to do at least. So I've done a little bit of everything. I think I've done engineering, reporting, I've filed for NPR, I've done the national and various production work. And I think the only thing I haven't done so far is hosting a live talk show. And probably a lot of that is just due to working at a small station and working at a small station without a giant budget and not having like the big formal internship programs. And I think that working at a small station has kind of turned out to be a bit of a blessing for me and many others. I think everybody has gotten their start at small stations. So that's roughly where I'm at.
All right. How about Sara?
Yeah. Hey guys. So I've been like involved in journalism in some capacity since I was like 14. I was the managing editor of our high school newspaper and then editor-in-chief with a few other people too. Was it senior year? Like 12th grade. So I started out in print, and then when I got to IC my freshman year, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with journalism. I just knew I wanted to do it in some capacity. And then sophomore year, I just kind of walked into WICB and just found my home and just got involved right away. I dabbled in some TV stuff and then other papers too on campus, but nothing really seemed to fit. I took a lot of politics classes too and really enjoyed those. And that really like helped in my development and like critical thinking. Right after college, I worked at WHCU, which is a small commercial radio station that a lot of other IC grads had worked at. And so it was a staff of 4 people for the news department. And there were 2 reporters and I was one of them. And that's how I started. 8 months after working there, I got picked up by a TV station in Vermont and I worked commercial TV. So I was a multimedia journalist and also weekend TV producer. So I did both there for 2 years and loved Burlington. It was a great place to work and grow. And then I moved to Richmond, and originally I was a TV reporter here for like 2 years. I was the Capitol Bureau reporter during like Northam, the governor's blackface scandal. I was an MMJ there too. I worked for like 6 different TV stations, turning daily political stories and statewide issues for a while. And then I got recruited to apply for this position. VPM is a growing company. It used to be a staff of like 4 people in the news department, plus a few hosts, and it's grown like 3 times that size in the time I've been in Virginia. And so, you know, they really needed someone to come in and kind of manage the day-to-day ops for news. And so that's why I was hired. So I oversee all the daily news content, and we don't have a features editor right now, so I schedule and edit most of those too. And I oversee the internship program, and that we have like 4 interns right now, and they range from like current like college students to recent graduates. We've also had a few high schoolers too. And so, you know, it's a really good station to be working with in the sense that I have really committed, experienced journalists, and they kind of helped me learn a lot more about public media along the way. I knew at some point I wanted to get into NPR just because, honestly, I just knew that the values and ethics were a lot higher in terms of standards than commercial TV. And the biggest problem I had working in commercial media was that, you know, there were a lot of stories I wanted to tell for vulnerable populations, and it was really hard to do that way. So I'm glad I found the opportunity to move into this kind of role now. And being a manager starting at like 26 was not really what I thought was going to happen with my life. So it kind of happened that way, and I'm thankful for it. I've only been in public media for like 18 months, I think, and most of that's been a pandemic. And so managing in a time where everyone's remote has been a big challenge. But, you know, luckily our staff was pretty close to begin with. And so it's been an evolving kind of process, and it's been really exciting. And we're trying to do a lot of new things during a time where like Richmond's been in like the spotlight a lot in the past couple of years. So it's been exciting to see that and see how different we can cover everything, because we try to represent the community in a different way. So that's kind of where I'm at in my career. So yeah.
All right, and Katelyn then.
Yeah, hey folks. So I'm Katelyn, and I am a talk show producer here in Iowa Public Radio for 1.5 more glorious weeks before I start a new gig. But I came to IPR about 3 years ago now, and are any of you not working on campus radio? Do you all work for WICB? Everyone works for WICB? Okay,
I think
cool.
everyone here, yeah.
I didn't. I wish in retrospect that I would have. It sounds awesome, and I liked listening to it a lot when I was in college. But I never planned to work in radio. I knew I wanted to work in journalism, but I really thought I wanted to do magazine or online, and that was always the plan. And then one summer, the summer between my sophomore and junior year, between my sophomore and junior year, I really wanted to stay in Ithaca for the summer, which if you have the chance to do is lovely and you should do it. And so I was like, oh, I need an internship. What am I going to do? The community radio station, WRFI in Ithaca, had a internship opening, and I took it, and I ended up interning with them and then volunteering a little bit through the rest of college. But it was all pretty informal, pretty self-taught. No one at the time was paid on staff. It was all community run. And then I graduated college, and I didn't really think about it. Still wanted to do online, still wanted to do magazine. And I had a really hard time getting my first job in journalism, which is something that I think everyone should talk about more. It's really hard to get that first job, and that's okay. And you're not bad at your craft. You're probably really good at your craft. It's just really hard to get that first job. So it took me about 8 months to get hired in my first job in journalism. And during that time, I was working at a coffee shop, and I was working as a freelance writer. I got picked up by a now defunct publication out of LA, and also started working for Vice. Then I got a call from WRFI in Ithaca, and they said they'd gotten a grant to hire their first news director, and did I want the job? So I moved back to Ithaca and worked 4 jobs, including news directing for WRFI and freelancing for Vice. And did that for a year. I started their morning program and built out their partnership with IC. So now there's an investigative partnership there, which is something that I helped get off the ground. Did that for a year, learned a ton, and then decided I really wanted health insurance and really wanted to only work one job. And also that I really, really wanted to work in public radio. In that year, fell in love and realized that radio was exactly what I wanted to do, and audio storytelling was what I wanted to do. And there were no two ways about it. So I started applying to public radio jobs and landed a job in Iowa. I moved out here thinking that I wanted to cover the caucuses, which I did. So I moved out here in 2018, and have been the producer on our 2 daily talk shows. One airs at 10, one airs at noon. It's really unusual for a station of this size to have 2 flagship talk shows 5 days a week, but we do. There's a team of 3 producers that put out both talk shows every day. And one is more arts and culture, one is news and politics. And I've just kind of worked from there by working at a station that is about medium sized, but IPR is very well established in the public media climate nationwide. I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of big projects. So I was our senior producer for our caucus coverage and our election 2020 coverage. So I don't know if anyone followed caucus night, but it was a shitstorm. I was there. We broadcasted for 6 hours straight. I had programming planned for 4, and we never got results. And I learned a lot about thinking on my feet and developing programming as it went. And that was a exhausting but amazing experience that I'll never forget. And I'm a way better journalist because of it. And then on election night 2020, I sat in one studio with a walkie-talkie from 1994, and my boss sat in another studio with a walkie-talkie from 1994, and we talked to each other on walkie-talkies and produced a show. I've also had the opportunity to freelance for NPR along the way, for the CBC in Canada. I senior produced Iowa's contributions to a national talk show called America Amplified for 2 seasons. So I've kind of had a little bit of an opportunity to do everything. And that really came just out of wanting to do everything. I think working in public media, a lot of times it's really what you make it. So you can come in and you can produce your shows and go home, and that's awesome. Or the fact that the member stations work together gives really great opportunities for collaboration, or to pitch a story to NPR, or to another public radio show like Here and Now. And that's something that's been really awesome. So yeah, if any of you are interested in getting into public radio, I really encourage you to look at places outside the coasts. I'm from Oregon. I was living in New York and Massachusetts before this. The first time I came to Iowa was when they flew me out for the interview. And I like almost had a panic attack because it was so flat and it like freaked me out. So I really, really encourage you to open your mind to coming to places like this. I've had the opportunity to report on topics I never thought I would, and talk to people I never thought I'd have the opportunity to talk to, and I'm so much better for it as a person and a journalist. And there's a lot of really, really awesome jobs in public media in the Midwest and in the South. There's just a really awesome culture that supports this medium here. So yeah, I really encourage that as you guys start thinking about what you want to do after graduation.
And last but not least, Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I know a lot of you guys. I worked with you guys because I've been out of school for like 2 years. But I am working at an NPR affiliate in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is like a little bit north of like Charleston and Savannah. I also never really listened to NPR when I was a kid. I didn't really know what it was. My parents just like played like the Cranberries and stuff. And I went to school up in Maine for a few years before I transferred to Ithaca. And while I was up there, I just happened to take this intro to journalism class to fulfill like a writing credit. And also my friend was in it. So I took this journalism class and I was like, wow, I really like this. This is really fun. So then I kind of decided to like transfer schools because I wanted to pursue it further. So that brought me to IC. And during that time, I had a long distance boyfriend who lived like 7 hours away. So I was driving constantly. And I got sick of like the random, like really strange commercial talk radio stations, as well as like my own music. So I started listening to NPR, like just for these long car rides. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. I bet I could do this. So I got to IC, and then I kind of just put everything into WICB. I didn't really even mess around with the Ithacan or anything because I was like, I want to do public radio. That's what I want to do. It seems so cool and everybody's really cool. And like, I like it. I want to do it. So I did that. And I was the news director at WICB. I don't even know what years, I lose track of that, but the year of my senior year, so probably 2014 through 2015, which no, that was high school. 2018 through 2019. I was like, that sounds really far away. But anyway, so yeah, I did that. I did a lot of stuff for Ithaca Now. And that was pretty much my whole life, pretty much all through college. I really didn't even like a lot of my journalism classes that much. I kind of just did all of the public radio, college radio stuff. And I really liked it. And like Katelyn said, public radio is very much what you make it. So I just kind of like came up with a lot of projects, like put a lot of work on myself to kind of learn more and grow more. And I think that worked out well. I graduated in 2019. I originally I just kind of applied to jobs all over. And I think that helped me a lot in terms of getting a job. I didn't really have any like location requirements. And I originally applied here at WHQR, and I had a really good interview, and I was like, this is my dream job. I'm like, oh my God, I want to work here. And then they're like, hey, we didn't select you, but we really liked you. You're really nice. And I was like, thanks. So then I got a job offer from a newspaper kind of in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. I don't know what it was with North Carolina. And I went out there and I interviewed and I accepted the job offer. And then literally like 3 days later, WHQR emailed me. They're like, hey, the other applicants didn't work out. Like, do you want to come down here and interview here? I'm like, oh no, but I didn't sign a contract. So if you're on the fence about a job, don't sign anything. So I came down here, they offered me the job and a lot better pay. So I was like, yeah. And then I had to call the newspaper back and I was like, I'm really sorry. And it was really awkward and I felt really bad. So I started out as a reporter here. You'll find that public radio is just growing exponentially, like beyond other news mediums. It's a really successful industry and at a lot of different stations. So my newsroom here, I was hired as like one reporter out of like 2 when I started. And now we have like, I think 5 or something like that. And I started being a sub for All Things Considered, and they were like, hey, you're pretty good at that. So I'm like, yeah, I want to do that more. Like I got a lot of that experience working at WICB as a newscaster, and hosting Ithaca Now and all of that stuff. So I felt like really prepared for it, for being someone right out of college. So I started doing that, and my station's really small. So I host All Things Considered. I produce All Things Considered. I write all the newscast. I read all the newscasts. Like I literally do every aspect of the show. It's me alone in a studio. It's insane. Because a lot of public radio stations aren't like that. We're really small, and I'm the youngest person by like 20 years. So it's very old school in a lot of ways. But it's a really great station. It's just really fun because I've had a lot of room to grow. I'm like launching a new podcast and I'm doing reporting stuff and I'm all over the place, but it's really, really fun. And I really love it. And I don't know anything else I should mention other than, yeah, I definitely recommend getting into public radio if this is something you enjoy doing, because it's very rewarding and I don't regret any day of it. So yeah.
All right. And I think we'll just start with a question that I think is pretty prevalent to everyone here. Any of you can kind of take the lead on this, but what was it in your time at IC that you feel that you did that prepared you for most for working in the professional world?
I can answer that if no one else wants to, because this was recent, so I remember a lot of it. I definitely the newscasts, literally going on air once a day or once a week, I guess it was once a week. It really prepares you for hosting and that aspect of public radio, like being on air, maybe doing live interviews, like just intonation, like little things that you don't think, you go as a newscaster, you're on air and like you're tripping over words and it's like awkward. And like half the time I'd be like choking on my own spit, which sounds really gross, but it happens a lot. But those little weekly increments made a really, really big deal. And yeah, just all aspects of it, like reporting for Ithaca Now, like every single thing I did through WICB prepared me immensely for the job I'm in now, like beyond what I could have thought it did. I'm not like being paid by WICB, I swear. Like I really, really just love that station just because everything it offered me and everything it taught me. So yeah, you're in a good spot if this is the career you want to go into, for sure.
I feel like my politics classes really helped me with critical thinking in a way that like, the journalism classes are really good. And like when you do like your multimedia journalism, your social mobile, it's really important to take those kinds of classes to get used to daily deadlines. Cause like with broadcast, like I tell my whole family not to call me until like after 6 o'clock. Like that's the rule. Don't call me unless someone died. And like literally they don't unless someone died. And so like, that's just been what my life has been since graduating college and even like in college too. And, taking those classes to get used to a daily deadline is really important. But, the liberal arts classes that you take too, like don't poo-poo those because they're really important to test like your own ethics and like how you interact with people who don't think the same as you. I took a few politics classes with Katelyn that really like changed how I process things and how I look at my own writing and what's missing from my writing and my own biases that you might not realize until you're in the interview process. And so that's something to take into consideration because, you know, like, yes, the four of us here sitting here, we're all white. I work in a predominantly Black city. My newsroom is very white. We're trying to diversify like who we have actually telling these stories too. And it's a big issue. And so, you know, I've made DEI like a really big priority for our internship program. It's something our journalists are like hyper aware about. And we're basically doing audits of like who we're interviewing because we want to make sure that we have enough diverse sources. Because historically, journalism overall is historically a predominantly male and white industry. And now there is more diversity coming into it, which is really good. But it's taking a while for a lot of newsrooms to get used to that. And it's taking a while for a lot of newsroom leaders to be comfortable having those conversations too. So taking those classes sooner and like challenging the way you think and why you think a certain way is going to help you no matter where you go. Because I mean, I never thought I'd live in the South and like want to stay in the South, and I love it. And I love it too because of the history here. And because being in the city that I'm in right now, a lot of these conversations are happening like in bars when the bars were open, you know, because they're not really now. And, you know, it's more casual to have these kinds of conversations about diversity, you know, in interpersonal relationships. And that's happening in our newsroom and a lot of workplaces too. So my advice would be to take classes that are not just journalism and to like actually do the homework and actually participate because it'll challenge you in a different way.
I'll totally agree with, and Sarah and I have talked about some of the DEI stuff, and I think that is the biggest problem facing the entire industry. It is a problem at my shop. It is a problem system wide. If you just Google it, and there are links I can share with you if you're interested about kind of the reckoning surrounding race that's happened over the last 12 months in public radio. But going back to the question about kind of preparation, I was a politics minor as well, so I'm on board with everything that was said before. Something that came to mind is Ray Ghazi still teaching? Oh, wow. That's fantastic because we just went through, we had a consultant come in and just kind of helping us analyze our news magazine shows. And we had a session about writing for the air, and Ghazi could have been teaching that class. It was the exact same stuff that he was teaching us, and it's stuff that I remember from the media writing course that he taught 12 years ago. Writing short, writing conversationally. Like I remember Ghazi telling me once I wrote 2 sentences on an assignment that he said should only be 1 sentence, and he marked me down for it. So those really elemental kind of courses that we took ended up kind of really being necessary and something that I still think about a lot. The other class that kind of I think kills everyone to a degree, but was super beneficial, was Ben Crane's documentary workshop course. I mean, that's absolute hell for 4 months, but definitely prepared me for this job and probably for any journalism job, perhaps better than just about anything that I've ever done. So if you have an opportunity to take that course, I would highly recommend it. I would kind of shelve some kind of personal ambitions or any kind of other ambitions that you may have and really focus on that. But it was, that's one of those courses that also really stuck with me. And again, just doing all the kind of radio stuff, I feel like I got all my kind of major nervous breakdowns that happened on air. I got those out of the way at ICB before I was getting paid to be on air. So I was able to work that out of my system before. So.
All right. And so I think, who was the one that asked this? I think it was it Vedant or Madeline who asked about podcasts? I think that's interesting. Well, someone asked about podcasts. But yeah, someone asked, how do you think podcasts, from your perspective, still being like not really old heads in the industry, but how do you think the rise of podcasts in the last like couple years has like changed the way you guys are doing things in the public radio sphere?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So I have been working on a lot of podcasts for our organization, and it's I think it really depends where you are. So I think if you are at a bigger station, your WNYCs, your KUOWs, WAMUs, you are at stations that have podcast staff. Georgia Public Radio, it's not just on the coasts. You're at a station, they have a podcast staff, they maybe have an executive producer, they have 3 producers, they have a host. Amazing. That is something that I think is happening more and more. But a lot of stations do not yet have that staffing. And I think there's definitely a split between the stations that are like really gung-ho and ready to do that, and then some resistance. And I think that really depends where you are. But I think the more that people in our generations start to come into the industry, the more and more I think that shift is going to keep happening. I think a big conversation, especially at more mid-size and smaller stations, is that you just don't have the staffing to create a product that can only live in a podcast. So there's a lot of conversations about how to make something work both in a radio format and a podcast format. Something I'm constantly bringing up is that those are different audiences. A podcast audience is not the same as a radio audience, and they do not listen the same as a radio audience. So making something that lives in both formats, while it can work with like It's Been a Minute with Sam Sanders, I think is one of the best NPR programs happening right now. And that's something that exists as both a radio and a podcast really well. But when you listen to it, it sounds like a podcast that they're playing on the radio, not a radio show that they're playing on a podcast. So I think that there's definitely growth happening. And I think every year that resistance weakens, and you see smaller stations doing more ambitious and exciting projects. So I think it's something that's only going to keep getting better as time goes on. And I think know that if you get a job as a producer or a reporter that's not directly in a podcast department, that doesn't mean that you aren't going to be working on podcasts. I produce 4 podcasts. And I do that while producing daily shows. And you might not see that on my job title, but it's definitely a line on my resume. So when you're interviewing, definitely like express your interest in podcasts and your background in podcasts, and have that as part of your portfolio. Which, side note, everyone should have a website, and it should be nice. It doesn't need to be fancy, but it should be nice, and it should be current. And that matters a lot. I think when I'm hiring, I have been on several hiring committees. I always look. But anyway, make sure that you're expressing that interest, because I think especially a lot of stations know they need to be going there and are really looking for people that can both work in the on-air space and work in a podcast space.
I think the podcasts are also pushing the industry. You mentioned Sam Sanders. I feel like I do wonder if Sam's show would exist on the radio if he didn't have the opportunity to kind of prove it on the podcast front as well. The same with Throughline right now on NPR, which started off as a podcast, and they air some of the segments during Morning Edition. And I feel like outside of NPR, a lot of the kind of the challengers, I guess, whether it is the kind of more established New York Times or the newer publications like Slate and Vox, not to mention all the even smaller shows than that, I think is forcing NPR to not rest on its laurels. And I think that that's something that public media has done for a really, really, really long time, is be really complacent with what we do. And I think that this competition has been a really necessary kick in the ass for this entire industry, for public media in general, not just public radio, but in general, for journalism in general, the whole mainstream kind of journalism world, I think, is being kicked by the same forces that are starting up the podcast. So we're one of those kind of mid-sized stations in Connecticut where we've done a handful of limited run podcasts, but it's not something that we've ever fully invested in. All radio shows are essentially being turned into podcasts. For us, we produce podcasts, but it's just repurposed radio shows.
Kind of jumping off what you were saying, Tucker, I think something that podcasts have really shown, like, through line, like Sam Sanders, is that the more authentic people are and the more relaxed, the better you sound on air, which has been a struggle my whole career to sound natural and sound like me. And I've noticed more in the past few years that even if you listen to Morning Edition or All Things Considered, you hear people just being themselves now. Like, the most joy I have is listening to like Rachel Martin, like talking to some musician that she's kind of like fangirling about. And I feel like 5 years ago, that wasn't a thing. So an aspect of this too, with podcasting becoming more predominant, we're just hearing people be more authentically them. And a lot of my reporters work with NPR in filing spots and features. And they've told me, because my background is a little different than theirs in terms of broadcast writing, they've shared with me some of the tips that NPR has kind of, helped them with their writing and sounding more like themselves and more natural. And it is hard to transition that way, and it takes time, but I feel like podcasting has really pushed them in that direction. My station is kind of in a mid-sized market, and we're trying to develop like a podcasting unit. And a big, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but Madeline, your question here about the ethical concerns about the daily and some criticism about some of the reporting, an issue that we've been talking about is if your podcasting unit doesn't live within the news department, the ethical standards and the editorial standards might not feel the same. And so what we saw with New York Times's, reporting was that they just kind of like trusted people to do what they were doing, and they didn't fact check it as thoroughly as they might have done because it was radio, because it was hard to do. So, and I just feel like that was just total BS personally, because like I fact check everything, and I'm pretty much a jerk about it. And I know my reporters get a little annoyed when I leave comments saying, can you please share this PDF with me so I can read it? I don't care that it's the budget. I will look at the percentages myself. And basically, I think that, as people are developing these podcasting departments, you have to think about too, not only story arc, what kind of style, but what is going to be your fact checking process to make sure everything is correct. And personally, when I was in local TV news, I don't feel like the fact checking was as thorough as I would have liked it. And I was doing my own fact checking half the time. So some people that I worked with were much more thorough, but once I got into more competitive fields, people weren't as thorough. So I think, moving forward with podcasting, a big ethical concern is like, what are your editorial standards? How is this going to impact workload for your reporters if they want to be involved too? And what does workflow look like? Because I know a lot of my reporters are really passionate about features and passionate about doing special projects like a podcast. But the day-to-day demands are really big still for being such a small station. So it's a balance, and it's something that we're constantly talking about. And I feel like there's been more movement in the past 6 months because our station in particular has released a couple of cool, more limited series podcasts. But you don't build an audience off of limited series. You build audiences off of the daily, off of all these different flagship, products that people come to rely on in their communities. And it's hard to figure out a unique way to create a Ithaca Now podcast or something like that sticks around for a decade. So that's something that I think a lot of newsrooms are dealing with right now.
Madeline, were you asking, was your question about because there were kind of two different things that led into one another. Were you asking about the caliphate specific stuff or the Michael Barbaro
Hi, everyone. I guess a little bit of both. And Sarah, thank you so much for that response. I truly appreciate that. I really agreed with what you had to say. So I guess the Michael Barbaro, interpersonal relationships within the reporting teams, stuff like that, that's been highlighted. And then also, like, as journalists, I thought it was very interesting that NPR was taking the time to really dive into this and to critique it in a way that was like journalists critiquing journalists. And they said they felt like they had an ethical duty to do that. So I found that very interesting.
One benefit that they have is that David Folkenflik, that is his entire beat, is focused on ethics and focused on reporting on the media. And I think that's, I believe it was several years ago, the New York Times stumped their ombudsman, which may have very well flagged some of these issues because the rumors surrounding Caliphate were swirling before this came crashing down on them. And I think that I really value NPR's public editor, that they still have that they have an independent voice, and that person, I'm blanking on her name right now. She's down at Pointer. Yes. Yeah. So she's independent. She's not, the newsroom, we used to work with the previous ombudsman pretty frequently, or the public editor, Elizabeth Jensen. And I don't think she was very well liked in the newsroom because of the questions she was asking. So that is, I think in a way NPR is acting at times, and there are other outlets doing it too, that they're acting as an ombudsman for the entire industry sometimes, but especially because it's in the audio realm. I think there is an additional, they kind of know the potential pitfalls in this type of reporting. So that's something that I've always been kind of proud of the system for having. Also, don't bully other journalists like he did. Just, yeah. And if you're going to do it, don't do it in print. Don't type it out. Everything is going to leak.
So I'm gonna open it up here. Who has a question for our panel here? Feel free to raise your hand. Vedant.
So I guess my question is that I think Katelyn mentioned working 4 jobs at once, and Hannah, I know you're a very busy person from what you post online. So I guess, how do you find the breathing room amongst all this chaos that's going on in the journalism world and just in general as a communications person?
Yeah, that's super important. Self-care is really, 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 really important. Mental health is really, 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 really important, and journalists need to talk about it a lot more. To take care of myself, I adopted a pandemic cat. That's been really good for me. She knocked a bunch of stuff over earlier. You might have heard it. I throw pottery. That's been good for me. I'm really bad at it. And I think that's really good to have something that I'm like really bad at that I do in my free time. And I just don't care that I'm bad at. It's been a really good stress relief. But I think like outside of those kinds of things, building a really strong support system is really important. And I think something that's really amazing about public radio specifically is really nice people work in this industry. This is an industry of really good people. Not that other industries aren't, but I feel like people are just exceptionally kind in public media, and build that network. I have great colleagues that are friends and feel like family to me. And I also have people that work at other stations around the country who I feel like I have a colleague relationship with that's been great for support and bouncing things off of. But I think it's really important to have those people in your life who are your friends or your family outside of the industry that can remind you that you're more than your job, which I think is something that can be really hard to remember when it's something you care so much about and you spend so much of your time on. I really, really encourage you to make sure you keep those relationships strong, no matter how much your job becomes your life in some ways, which I feel like it definitely does for me at times. Make sure you're taking time to foster your relationships. You're taking time to check in with yourself, that you're, if you need a mental health professional, you're reaching out and finding that, and just remembering that, like, if you don't take care of yourself, you're really not going to be able to take care of your stories and take care of your sources. So there's never a time where that's not important. And take your vacation time. Always take all of your vacation time. Every single last minute of vacation time, take it. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for it.
I was just about to say that there is this culture within journalism, I think, this very workaholic culture. The burnout in this industry is immense. Like, you really don't anticipate it until you're consuming news media, like 8 hours of your day and working on top of that. And you're like, why am I so stressed all the time? And why aren't I sleeping good? And a lot of my colleagues don't take their vacation time. And I think it's this culture, and I've asked about it, and I'll be like, why does no one else take, why am I the only one that takes vacation? And they're like, well, this is public radio, like we need to work hard. And especially at small local stations, especially, I am not about that. Take all of vacation time. Don't feel bad about it. Don't let yourself feel bad about it. If you're sick, take a sick day. Don't go in sick. I have colleagues who did that before the pandemic. I hopefully think after the pandemic, there will be more of a conversation on that. But yeah, take care of yourself for sure. And don't feel bad about taking care of yourself, I think, is the biggest thing, because you should, yeah.
Really awful with everything that you guys have just said. I feel like I don't think I've ever taken a full, my full amount of vacation time. I think going to the self-care thing, I think it was, about a little over a year after I started in Connecticut, the Newtown shootings happened. And I don't think it took me a good 5 years probably to kind of realize like how much of an effect that just covering this stuff has. And this is something that moving forward is going to be an issue following the pandemic as well. I think I didn't have any hobbies. I was the person working. I worked way too much. I mentioned kind of burning out on the talk show thing, and it's a real struggle to do. And the other thing is coming from ICB. This is something I did want to mention that I forgot about earlier was I was so used to just working for ICB, working for ICTV, doing schoolwork, and just kind of going through that rapid cycle for so long that I was just into that routine, and that just carried into my professional life. And I felt even more of an obligation to work even harder because I was getting paid then to be doing it. So I did share in the chat field too. The DART Center has a ton of resources for whether it is kind of mental health, all kind of safety related things for journalists. They put on a great seminar, kind of a webinar rather, last in January after the Capitol riots, kind of a crash course in what you need to know if you're going to be covering volatile situations, like everything from teaching you what signs to look out for, that sort of thing, potential threats that journalists face. And that was a bit of an eye opener as well. But the DART Center is one of those resources that is, I think, really amazing and has become even more vital for everyone, not just public media journalists.
Well, Hannah and Katelyn, I'm glad you realized that stuff earlier in your career. Because I mean, I'm only I'll be 6 years out of college in May, and I've experienced like the worst burnout, I think. And I came to public media thinking it was not going to be as much stress, and that was not the case. So, I mean, being a manager in a pandemic is the worst experience I think any manager will ever have, but it's been really scary. I mean, it's nerve-wracking when you're worried your coworker may have had COVID, and it's nerve-wracking in general, but knowing that and knowing that other people may have been exposed is like scary, And so there have been a lot more moments, I think, in the past year. And like, I'm taking tomorrow off. I took a sick day this week. Like, screw it. This was a really tough couple of months. And I mean, between the Capitol riot, we had our legislative session. I worked all weekend. And then going into this week, I was completely burnt out, and I just spent a whole day sleeping because I couldn't function. And, even though I am not actively reporting anymore and I'm just mentoring and editing and managing a lot, I'm really burnt out. And the more, you know, every single day, I mean, I feel like my co-editors and I talk about trying to make sure our staff is taking the time they need and reminding our reporters to take the time they need and our interns. But I think the hardest thing is for us to take our time. And it's been really hard to even, I mean, as you guys were talking, I'm like, I feel really guilty for taking tomorrow off. Like, I actually feel guilty knowing I'm leaving my staff, and that's really hard to do. And so it's something that, you know, I never thought I would worry about so much, but I was very used to taking calls in commercial media. You know, this is very sad. This is not meant to be super sad. Both of my grandmothers died in 2019 within a few months of each other. And at both of their funerals, I got calls from my job. People just didn't care that I had the day off and they called me. And it was so hard to not pick up that phone. And I picked it up because that was what I was used to. And then I realized soon afterwards, I was like, I shouldn't have to live like this. And since I've been working in public media, no one's called me on my days off. They'll usually check in and be like, are you okay? Like if I took a sick day or something, but if it's a day off, it's a day off. And they actually leave me alone and are respectful of that, which I like really appreciate.
Slack has kind of helped with that, I think, for us. It's annoying, but it's reduced the number of calls. It's Slack at least has a mute button on it or you can just delete the app off your phone.
Exactly. It's great.
Yeah.
But I mean, mental health is super important, and the Dart Center is great. I mean, seriously, I've used that as a resource while trying to come up with coverage plans for all of the stuff we've dealt with in the past year, and use it as a resource regularly with trying to train interns too, just because honestly, there's a lot of stuff, even in reporting about mental health, it can be a trigger for people. So you just never know, because this is extremely unusual. And even being remote, having virtual meetings every day, it's not the same as, you know, being in person. And I miss my staff a lot, even though I see them every day. Even if it's just a square that has their initial on it, I still see them every day. But, you know, this has been a really challenging year, and you need to take the time to do things for yourself, find hobbies, because I didn't realize I didn't have hobbies till I lived alone and was working like 60-hour weeks and was like, wait, what do I do? So I got a cat. And like, figure out the things that you love to do by yourself or like with your friends that has nothing to do with journalism, because the sooner you can realize that stuff, the better in taking care of yourself. So sorry that was sad. It's been a really sad year, guys. But I mean, I feel glad. My parents tell me every single day they're so glad I'm not in TV anymore and that I'm in public media, because of actually being in a workplace that cares about, you know, all these different things, from the community to also like being remote and like taking our health as a priority. So
yeah. So who has another question they want to ask? Madeline.
I had one that kind of relates to the resources you were talking about in the Dart Center. I was wondering what your workplaces are doing, like to build resources to help protect journalists right now, like out in the field, especially with like political riots and stuff like that, or like protests. Like you never know what's going on. Like I found it really nerve-wracking to watch the journalists at the Capitol being attacked. I'm sure you all did as well. And I like know someone that works and runs camera for NBC. And they hired like him a full bodyguard team. So that's the only way he was able to be safe that day. So I was wondering if you have any insight on what's happening with that in your workplaces.
We got, after the riots, as we were kind of prepping for Inauguration Day, our company bought ballistic helmets, gas masks. We prepared like hell, expecting for it, even though I wasn't, and I wasn't expecting much. I was spending a lot of time on those kind of social media outlets and monitoring stuff. And but we've got a system in place now. We've got we had security with us. We had more security. We had security guards with us that outnumbered the number of protesters that day. But on the same hand, I covered a Trump rally in 2016 in Hartford where there were kind of physical altercations between protesters and supporters after the rally ended, where it got pretty violent. There's a variety of things that have, there's a spectrum of kind of things that I think people and stations have been doing. And part of it is just being aware of the crowd. I think that's something that the Dart Center webinar was really helpful with, was things to look out for, how to avoid a stampede of people. Just basic things. I mean, it's not necessarily, I mean, definitely hiring security to security guards was a little bit overkill, but it's also, I'd much rather, it's definitely better for that than any of the other potential outcomes when we're underprepared, as we've seen in Annapolis and other places as well. So yeah, it's ongoing.
Yeah, it's ongoing for us too. Like I work on our coverage plans a lot of the time. And so luckily in 2020 in January, we had not luckily, but we had a 20,000 person gun rally in Richmond. And so I worked on our coverage planning for that. And so that kind of gave me a little bit of a taste for what to expect when it came to potentially violent situations. And luckily I had a few editors working with me who, relied on Dart Center practices. And, it's really hard to have these conversations with reporters when you also just have no idea what the situation is going to be like. So I feel like we overplan, and now we're looking into getting that kind of gear that Tucker was talking about. And it's a tough balance, right? Because sometimes you don't want to identify yourself as a reporter in those kinds of protests because you can fly under the radar and not draw attention to yourself. So it's a tough balance. I don't know if you heard, one of our reporters actually got pepper sprayed by police during a Black Lives Matter protest. And so I had literally written press on his bright yellow vest that you could see a mile away. And he had his IDs and everything. He identified himself as press, and he still got pepper sprayed. And so it's hard to know what's really the best thing to do. So when working on these, usually we rely on the buddy system. So stick with your buddy the whole time. I try to pair up people according to their body size. And also if there's I will say too, certain people may be targeted. If we have a reporter who is Black, they might be targeted. So I try to pair them up with someone who might be a little bit different build, just so them as buddies can even each other out. And also usually I'll buddy someone who may present as a woman and may present as a man together, just so that they even each other out and make sure they can be on each other's backs and make sure they're okay. So I kind of strategize like that a little bit. And then in terms of COVID, we haven't had our interns out in the field. We bought everyone boom poles. We try to give everyone as many masks as we can. We had looked up all these different creative ways to clean everything just to make sure that everyone had this kind of gear. And then in the station too, we have a pretty strict cleaning protocol now that I think they'll stick with after the pandemic too. Because honestly, I'm how did you not clean your desk when other people were going in there? Please don't eat Cheetos when you're hosting, just don't do those things. So there's a lot of things that I think will become more regular practice when it comes to cleaning and those protocols, and also the buddy system and stuff. It's hard to put yourself in that mindset to think about it. My acting news director right now has a background in emergency management. And so I'm learning a lot from her about how to even strategize these things if there was a hurricane and stuff too. So there's a long way to go, but I'm glad people are talking about these different things, because it's just hard to plan when you just don't know what's going to happen. So
Do you guys get hate mail and threats? I'm assuming, Sarah, you probably do.
I get Twitter threats like
Yeah.
all the time. Sorry. Yeah.
That's the other thing, is the online harassment that has been getting worse.
Yeah. And sorry to go into so much detail. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to coverage planning. That's like why I do my job. So ask away if you ever have questions.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see, Bridget, Kyle, Beck, Lauren, do any of you have a question that you want to ask? Lauren.
Yeah, I apologize if this was already asked. I'm just joining from a class, but I'm wondering if you could speak about the public media business model aspect of things as opposed to corporate business models, and how that affects you as a journalist. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that?
I think that the listener supported, I pitch, so I'm trying not to go into like my pitches right now. I think the listener supported aspect of public radio is like the best part of working in this industry. And when I move into my new job, it's something I'm gonna miss immensely, I'm sure. The fact that at Iowa Public Radio, where I work, listeners are our single greatest source of income, which is not true for every station, but we have an incredible listener sustainer base, and it makes me feel so much freer in what I do. I cannot even fathom having one of my editors telling me I needed to cover something for any reason other than it was exactly what we needed to cover. It's incredible. It gives you such freedom. It makes me feel safe in the work that I'm doing, that I never feel like I am, disguising sponsored content as real journalism. I can say, as someone who just went through an interview process for several jobs, when I interviewed at a couple for-profit podcast house, and that is not the way that they were doing things. It's something that's really unique to public radio. Sometimes it can, I feel like a silly side effect is that I'll get listener complaint emails that are like, you said this was like an Eastern pine, but really that was a Western pine, and I'm a sustaining member, so how dare you?
Our emails always lead. That's what most emails lead with is, I'm a sustaining member.
Yeah, or it'll be like, John Doe, sustaining member.
Yes.
So that's like a fun side effect of it. But really what it means is that your listeners feel really bought into your product. And I feel like I work for the people I serve and the people I cover. I don't work for anyone else. And I can't say enough good things about publicly funded journalism. I think it's amazing. And the fact that it actually works is incredible.
There's a little bit of a double-edged sword, I feel, with it, though. And going back to kind of the push that podcast is pushing us in a certain direction, is that, our demographics are, as you would expect, I think, across the board, kind of the middle-age, middle to upper income people who donate. And I do feel like that is kind of holding us back sometimes, not wanting to upset, disrupt that particular donor base, because donations are kind of king. Even though nobody donates directly to NPR, they donate to member stations. I feel like it does create some hesitancy, and it's not just in public media, it's I think the entire nonprofit world in general. That's something that I've been wondering about a little more. I think it's better than the alternatives, but it does make kind of systemic change, I think, a little more difficult, and it makes risk-taking a little more difficult sometimes as well. So I totally agree with you on that. It's just something I've been thinking about a lot more recently.
It's weird because I'm only kind of just beginning to learn more about this donor stuff, just because I have to ask my interns to write pledge pitches, and I get to finally write a pledge pitch, and I'm like, how do I do this? But the thing that I still, it's weird because before I came, there wasn't as much organization, but a lot of the reporting was still very similar. And I feel like since more people have come on board, we've just been hyper focused on serving vulnerable populations who might not be donors, but they might be people who would really like resources and like to learn about these resources. And so we've been trying to branch out even more too, as a station in general, to reach people that might not listen right now and to just try to serve them in another way. And I appreciate that it appears our donors are okay with that. But I also, we've been trying to do more of a firewall so we don't really know who our donors are and don't know what they're kind of pushing, because that's also like ethically an issue. When I was in, commercial television, I a couple times did morning shows where I would go and like be at the Red Cross blood drive and like do all these cute, goofy things because someone sponsored it. And so I'm not doing that anymore. And while that was fun, that wasn't journalism, and in the same way. And I feel like since I've gotten into public media, we've been more focused on doing harder stories, important things for the community, and not as much fluff. My coworkers and I joke, like, what would your podcast name be? And my family says, your podcast would be Pumpkins and Potholes, because that's all I reported on before coming to public media was pumpkins and potholes. And so now I report on like infrastructure issues and like all these like complicated things, because we're more focused on, the vulnerable populations in our area than I think other outlets are that are commercial. That makes sense. And I'm not sure how fundraising necessarily plays into it, but I feel like we care more about the community because of our funding model. So. I love your cat. I'm sorry. I've seen this the whole time, and I had to lock my cats out because they really get
I
into
know. I'm sorry. I have a roommate, so I couldn't lock her away.
It's okay.
She's so annoying.
Every time you get in a meeting with a cat, it makes my day.
I know. I'm sorry. It's embarrassing.
No, it is not embarrassing. It is delightful. Keep the cat in the room.
Her name is Buffy the Mouse Slayer. She says hello.
I do want the freshmen in the room to ask a question. I'm going to make you each ask one. So come up with something.
Wow, you're really putting us on the spot like that.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
It doesn't have to be related to this. You could ask whatever. You could ask, what did we have for breakfast today? That's our go-to.
Technically it counts, so.
I can start if you want, Kyle.
Yeah, you can go ahead. I'm still thinking up here.
Okay. I was just wondering, I just realized that was a really stupid question. I'm so sorry.
No, there's no stupid question. Ask it.
I don't know if it's a great question.
I feel like this has like already been answered, but in terms of like getting involved with things like maybe other than like WICB, like maybe like, I don't know if you guys got involved with like other student media platforms like the Ithacan or like maybe ICTV, but like, has that at all helped you in like your professional careers in like currently, or sorry, my roommate just texted me. Has that at all like helped you in your professional career, and like if so, how?
I mean, I will say that like my company's model is moving more towards like digital first as well, which includes podcasting and also just trying to be more active in how we schedule posting on the web and having more in-depth web stories. I didn't really like working with the Ithacan, and like I shouldn't say that because my roommate was the editor-in-chief when I was the like news director of ICB. But I mean, it's a great place to like learn a little bit more. When I was there, I learned I didn't want to do that. So I think an important aspect of like your development in college too is doing things and realizing I don't like that. I don't want to do that. And so it's worth trying everything. I mean, what's the harm? It's like one semester. You have the rest of your life to figure it out. But I mean, I will say like part of my job is digital editing too and posting to the web. So the more experience you can get doing all these different things, the better, because this industry is constantly changing, which is super exciting. But, with that comes a whole other skill set that, there are some things that I think other journalism students got to take classes on, like social mobile journalism. And I'm kicking myself for not taking that because it was really good. And the people who did take it really have an upper level on, their careers right now. So just do everything. There's no harm.
I did play for ICTV during the annual softball game. Yeah, it's fine. Most of my friends are actually TV people. And a lot of our stations, I think, Sarah, you're a dual licensee too, right?
Yeah, we got PBS. Yeah.
Yeah, so like my station, we've got television as well. So doing the other stuff definitely doesn't hurt.
Yeah,
I, as I mentioned, did not want to work in radio. I thought when I was in college, I was wrong. I'm so glad I do this. But I was an editor for Buzzsaw, and I think everyone should do something that is not audio related, because being a good writer is going to serve you no matter what you do. If you go into radio, being a good writer is important. If you decide that you're going to do something completely different with your life, being a good writer is important. And I am constantly finding with my interns and even with people we hire that a lot of people do not have those foundations. And it's something that really sets people apart in the industry. So no matter what you're doing, make sure you're getting those fundamentals in. And that doesn't have to be a campus publication, but I think that's a great way to learn.
All right, Kyle.
So my question, at least for me, getting involved on campus is I've been doing stuff with ICTV and for the radio stations. I was going to ask, I don't know if it's been answered, but if you did any multitasking between clubs at Ithaca and how that translated over to actually going out into the workforce.
Yeah, my junior year, second semester, I was an RA, was making a documentary for my journalism class, and was the assistant news director for ICB. And I'll tell you, and I think I worked for ICTV too that semester. It sucked, but like I basically do that now. So I think the more multitasking you can try to like get under your belt will be helpful, because within your first few years, no matter what you do in your career, you're going to be thrown a lot of stuff to just see what works. And it's really beneficial to just try to do as much as you can now as well. Obviously, your classes come first. That is like the most important. But I mean, it's totally worth trying to do like one TV show and do newscasts. It's manageable. Learning those skills now will also help translate into how you can be productive with like a more regimented schedule with daily deadlines in the workplace too. So, I mean, it's super helpful. Honestly, I live by Google Calendar now because I schedule when I can eat lunch and like every meeting I have. So the more you can do, the better. And it'll translate. I mean, there's so much stuff happening in this industry, and I even forgot to mention, like, we're trying to do a news TV show too that like I guess I'm going to be involved with in some way. So like, and now I'm back with TV. I don't know what's happening, but it's going to happen in the next year. So you never know. This industry is constantly changing, and every newsroom is constantly changing too. So
when I was first hired as an intern, not saying I'll advise this, but the guy who hired me and ultimately became my boss later on, and the host of my show, he looked at my resume and I had my GPA on there, and he said, "Wow, great GPA. Doesn't mean anything." So he kind of, and that actually really changed my attitude. Was then I kind of shifted my focus from like, I'm not going to say I didn't care about classes, but I was much more focused on gaining the experiences rather than the grades. Like Ben Crane had a contract rating system for one of his classes, and there was a paper that could be written for a B, or you didn't have to write a paper and get a B minus, and most of us took the B minus.
What? Are you kidding me? I like got Dean's List every year. I'm sorry. I'm like, I worked way too hard in college.
It's hurt my chances for graduate school, I guess, in the future, but
That's so fun.
I don't want to sound like a bad influence, but I was kind of in this weird, there was a lot of professor turnover when I was in the journalism department. A lot of positions got moved around, and there were a lot of new faculty and a lot of faculty leaving. And I had some really just not great experiences with the journalism classes. I had a lot of really good positive experiences with the psychology department, which was my minor. But yeah, the GPA doesn't matter, you know, and I'm a big fan of like, my time is precious to me. So if there is a class that I'm not learning a lot from, you know, I'm going to pass it, but I'm not going to stress myself out about it. And, you know, I think just realizing, I think time management is really just the key. You know, how much is this serving me? How much am I getting out of this? And, you know, not saying fail all your classes or anything like that, but, you know, just really recognize, you know, where your priorities are, and, you know, that experience that you get just from being out in the field, just from being involved with different clubs, that I think is just really valuable over anything, in my opinion. So yeah.
All righty. I think one last call for any questions or last thoughts or anything. Or are we good? Just about to have a question?
I'll
No, I would just say goodbye.
I'll drop my Twitter handle in the chat here, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions in the future.
Yeah. Do you all want me to share your email and Twitter? You good with that?
Yeah, my email's not going to be great for me for too much longer, but I will still have the same Twitter. So feel free to reach out to me there.
And Jay, I think I sent you my Gmail. Yeah. I can throw in a Gmail too.
Cool. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so that's the easiest way to get me. So thank you guys for coming. This was really cool to talk to you all.
Yeah, I'm really glad you guys came. I think this was great, and I'm gonna take this, put it on YouTube, and share it with the rest of the crew, because some people couldn't be here that I know wanted to be, and I think it was a great set of, you know, points and things to focus on and all these other things, and I'm really grateful for you guys.
Yeah, and you guys have a great news director. Jay is totally killing it. Like, you guys are in good hands. So
I'm having fun.
Awesome.
Well,
I
thank
send
you
them
all
plenty
so
of
much
Slack
for your
messages. Don't
time.
worry.
of course.
Yeah, I think yeah, you guys are free to go. Thank you for coming again.